Mitt Romney is going to vote to convict the president of Article 1 of the impeachment clauses, abuse of power. He will vote to acquit on the obstruction of Congress. This has been something we've been speculating upon for some time, but now he has said that this is going to be what he's going to do. Is it your view that he will be the only Republican to do this?
It is, and Ali, make no mistake about it, we just witnessed something truly historic. Never in a presidential impeachment has a senator of the same party of the president being impeached voted for his removal. You just saw the Mitt Romney there that Republicans, and particularly supporters of his going back to 2010, 2011, have always said was inside there, this man of conscience, someone who's very much guided by his faith, guided by the legacy of his father, the late George Romney, deciding to stand against his party and with what he said was his oath before God to follow his conscience and, in this case, convict this president. I was struck that he said he wanted to hear from John Bolton, not because he hoped Bolton would have more damning evidence of this president's malfeasance, but that Bolton might tell him something that would allow him to acquit this president. You heard it in his voice. You heard it in his calls that he knows he's going to be attacked by his own party, by his own president, but that he felt like this is something he absolutely had to do to be able to keep his head up before God and before his children and his grandchildren. An absolutely historic moment on the Senate floor just now.
What a remarkable thing. Mark Leibovich, you have just published an article in the New York Times about this with Peter Baker about the decision and how Mitt Romney came to it. He actually laid the argument out quite well. He spoke. I mean, he seemed to be choking up and holding back tears in saying this, but he was making the case about why he understands the consequence of this. He understands that he will bear the president's abuse as a result. But he mentioned God, he mentioned his faith, he mentioned his trust in the political system as his justification for doing this.
Yeah, I mean, to reiterate what Garrett said, I mean, this is historic, but it's historic not just because he is a Republican senator voting against the president in this case. This is also the Republican nominee from 8 years ago, and it does give you an indication of where the Republican Party has evolved from in 8 short years. I mean, Mitt Romney was the last non-Trump nominee of the Donald Trump Republican Party. So I think that itself is a marker. But clearly, and I was impressed by this earlier when I talked to Senator Romney in his office, very emotional day for him, very emotional issue for him. He obviously agonized over this a great deal. He realizes also that the path ahead for him is going to be quite unpleasant from within his party. Now, he does have the benefit of being at the end of his career, not at the beginning of his career, and also has 5 or 4.5 years before his next election campaign in Utah. But still, a momentous moment for a lot of reasons, both symbolic but also, in the final count, and how the president views this and how the country will view this proceeding.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.